In this lesson, we'll go into a little more detail about how the neuron operates. It's a cell with electrical and chemical excitability. Now, in a previous lesson, we learned what a simple nervous system consists of. We've got several cells here. We have sensory cells that transform some kind of physical stimulus in the environment into electrical signals. Those electrical signals go down to terminals where chemicals are released, and that generates a small electrical signal in the target cell. And if the addition of all those electrical signals add up to pass a threshold, this target cell will generate an output, and so on, and we get movement. In this lesson, then, we'll look at some of the details of how these neurons operate. You'll recall that a neuron has three basic parts: the dendrites, these branching structures coming off the cell body, and then the long output cable called the axon ending in the terminal. And we'll be learning that the electrical nature of these cells consists of charged particles, ions like sodium ions, moving across the cell membrane. So the movement of any charged particle is a current. And in cells, the movement of ions is across the cell membrane. When these charged particles move into or out of the cell, that's an electrical signal. So again, we have the dendrites. They're going to be receiving chemical signals from many other neurons, and they will convert those signals into electrical signals. The sites of contact are called synapses. In this picture, we see the cell body, the axon down here, and then all these branches are dendrites. And on the dendrites are little structures, little bumps called spines. They're outgrowths along the dendrites where axon terminals from other neurons make synapses. In this picture, we see a neuron that has been labeled with a fluorescent molecule that binds to molecules inside the spines. So we see all the little bumps on the dendrites. Here we see it in magnification. So the red part would be the dendrite, and all the yellow things would be spines on the dendrite. And that's where synapses would be, from terminals from other neurons. The cell body is going to be integrating the electrical activity of all the inputs, all the synapses. And if that electrical activity passes a threshold, a certain value, a certain amount of electrical activity, then the cell body will generate the output signal called the action potential. The axon then moves the output electrical signal down the axon terminal, and then the axon terminal at the very end here will be releasing chemicals called neurotransmitters, and these chemicals will generate an electrical signal in the target cell. So what we have then is information flow through a neuron. The dendrites are collecting, they're detecting all the chemicals at the synapse, which are transformed into electrical signals. The cell body is going to be integrating, adding up all of the electrical activity on the dendrites, and if it reaches a threshold, then it will generate the output signal called the action potential, and the axon will carry that electrical signal down to the terminals, and the terminals will release chemicals onto the next neuron in the chain. So here we see then two neurons joined by the synapse. We can call this one here the communicating neuron, the one that is sending a signal to the target neuron. In this first part of the lesson series, we'll examine what happens at the synapse. And then in the next lesson, we'll look at how a neuron sends its output signal down the axon.